10 days after playing the biggest match of his life, he was dead. Not on a battlefield, not in a car crash, but because of a single touch of the ball. The men who pulled the trigger reportedly called out the score with each shot fired, as if football itself had become the sentence. 6 bullets for 6 words that would haunt a nation forever. To understand how a country could murder its own hero, you had to go back to the beginning. To a boy in Medellin, to a city that was both a cradle of dreams and a place where dreams could kill you. Medellin in the 1970s was a city of contradictions, beautiful mountains framing a place where poverty and ambition lived side by side. For children growing up there, football was not a hobby. It was oxygen. He was born into a working-class family that believed in 2 things above all else: hard work and dignity. From the very first time he kicked a ball, those values were written into every move he made. Even as a child he was different. He did not chase the ball with desperation. He read it, he anticipated it, and he played with a composure that made coaches stop and stare. By the time he was a teenager, Medellin had changed. Pablo Escobar had turned the city into the murder capital of the world, and every young man with a future faced the same unspoken choice: corruption or courage. Football clubs in Colombia during the 1980s were not immune to the drug trade. Cartel money flooded the sport, buying players, fixing results, and turning stadiums into something far more dangerous than a sports arena. He signed his first professional contract as a teenager and immediately found himself navigating a world where the lines between sport and crime were terrifyingly thin. Yet he refused to cross them. If you have ever wondered what real stories from football look like behind the headlines, this channel exists for exactly that. Follow Football Untold and never miss the stories that history tried to bury. His talent was undeniable, but his path was treacherous. Team owners with criminal connections, referees threatened into submission, and players who disappeared if they asked too many questions. He kept his head down and let his football speak. What saved him was not luck. It was character. In a country where violence was the loudest language, he chose to speak only in football, and slowly the world started to listen. Colombia had never qualified for a World Cup in the modern era until the late 1980s, when a generation of extraordinary players began to emerge and change everything. He was at the heart of it. When Colombia qualified for the 1990 World Cup in Italy, the country erupted. Streets filled with dancing, and for the first time in a generation, football felt bigger than the violence that surrounded it. In Italy he announced himself to the world. Elegant, composed, reading the game like a chess grandmaster, he was named among the most impressive defenders of the entire tournament. Back home, Colombia fell in love with its team. Children painted their walls yellow and blue. Parents named their sons after the players. Football had become the heartbeat of a wounded nation. By 1993, Colombia had become one of the most feared teams on the planet. A 5-0 thrashing of Argentina in Buenos Aires sent shockwaves across the world and put Colombia on the cover of every magazine. Pelé himself predicted Colombia would win the 1994 World Cup. The pressure that statement placed on a squad playing in the shadow of narco money and political chaos was immeasurable. Behind the celebrations, something darker was building. Illegal betting networks tied to the cartels had placed enormous sums on specific match outcomes. The players were no longer just athletes. They were pawns in a deadly game. He arrived at the 1994 World Cup in the United States carrying the hopes of 40 million people. He had never played better in his life. And then came the match against the United States. In the 22nd minute, a cross came in from the right. In attempting to intercept it, he stretched his leg and redirected the ball into his own net. One moment, one touch, one own goal that would cost him everything. Colombia lost 2-1. They were eliminated. The dressing room was silent. Back home, a nation that had been promised paradise had been handed devastation, and someone had to be blamed. Death threats had already begun flooding in before the team had even boarded the plane home. He received them, he read them, and then, with heartbreaking courage, he returned to Colombia anyway. On the 2nd of July, 1994, just 10 days after the own goal, he was shot and killed outside a nightclub in Medellin. He was 27 years old. 120,000 people lined the streets of Medellin for his funeral. Grown men wept openly. Women held photographs of him to their chests. The city that football had tried to heal was broken again. In the years that followed, his killer was convicted and sentenced. But justice could not undo what had been done. A voice for peace in a country drowning in violence had been permanently silenced. Colombia slowly rebuilt itself. The violence of the cartel era faded. And as the country found peace, it found him again. Statues were raised. Foundations were named in his honor. Schools taught children his story. FIFA eventually created the Fair Play Award that bears a spirit connected to his memory. But the truest monument to him was never made of stone. It was built in the hearts of an entire generation of Colombians who remember what he stood for. James Rodriguez, Falcao, and the golden generation that brought Colombia to the quarter-finals of the 2014 World Cup all grew up knowing his name. They played for something larger than themselves because he showed them what that looked like. He scored one goal at the World Cup. It went into the wrong net. And yet of all the goals scored in that tournament, his is the one the world still talks about 30 years later, because it cost a man his life. The story of this man is not really about an own goal. It is about what happens when sport becomes entangled with power, money, and fear. If stories like this deserve to be told and remembered, follow Football Untold, because the game has never been just a game, and these voices must never be forgotten.